Hey guys, has anyone heard of an app called Strava? Yep, I thought not. But seriously though, I'm delighted to say on today's app, I sit down with the co-founder of Strava, Michael Horvath. Strava was founded in 2009. It is so different to what it is today. The app was originally meant for cyclists. And actually in 2009, it wasn't even an app. I hear you gasp, apps didn't exist in 2009? Yep, they didn't. In fact, if you wanted to use Strava, you actually had to use the Garmin headset that Strava gave you, go on your cycle, and then upload the data manually to a website. And I can hear gasps, having to manually upload data to get your performance online. Yep, that is what people had to do in 2009. Totally different to what we have now, I know. But trajectory is key, and once you're on the right course, once you know that your idea is a good one, and that is what Strava had early on from feedback of users, then you just need to continue, but more importantly, continue to listen and iterate. No one thought in 2009 Strava would be where it is today. Certainly not Michael. They served a very narrow set of users, but a community was born. It served those users well. So what are the lessons, I hear you ask? Well, I can't tell you all of them. You're going to have to listen to the app to hear those. But what I would say is a couple of things. One, community matters. Grow your community right at the beginning. Don't just think, oh, I want to sell my product. The second is don't start too broad. Start really narrow. Yeah, okay, Strava's massive now, but again, they started with just cyclists. Try and be the expert at the narrow field that you start with and then expand if it goes well. It's time to go 100 days in.
Could we recreate the feeling of being on a team and having that sense of camaraderie with others? Now, the cyclists were a little bit upset when we said we were launching for runners. What's missing in the world? What can you go create? Better to get something rough and ready up and going. It has to have something that's really of real kind of a magic moment to keep people, like I said, working through the mud to get to the good stuff. Ask yourself, can I take this risk for the next 3-4 years?
There were clues because of that example you just gave as a kid where you were going out and selling something. Did that persist though when you were studying or when you were at school, even once you got to a professional point in your career? Were you always that sort of someone that wanted to build something, or did you see yourself just being employed forever?
Yeah, so I think going into university in the United States is sort of college is sort of something between, general education at high school level and not really developing you for a particular career. So coming out of college, wasn't exactly sure what I'd be doing. And so I bumbled around for maybe a few months after graduating. I went to Europe. I went on a big, long bike trip with my brother for about 3-4 weeks. And I came back from those travels. I'm like, okay, I got to find a job. And I found my way to two of my professors from college were starting a consulting firm. And they said, well, you can come on and be our first employee. And I was like, sounds good. So in a little ways, that was like we were starting a company, although I was just a research assistant. I wasn't really, didn't have too much of an insight into sort of what it takes to start a company through that. But what that got me hooked on was like, well, I like this kind of applying, in this case, economic theory into something practical. I like that. So I decided to go and apply to graduate school and get a PhD in economics, which I did. And academia is actually pretty entrepreneurial, it turns out. What do you do as an academic, a research academic? You try to think what doesn't exist yet. What knowledge did we not have? What could we go and explore? And if we're onto something good things will happen. We'll learn something. We'll be able to publish a paper. We'll be able to teach this thing that we discovered. And entrepreneurship is a little like that too, where you ask, what's missing in the world? What can you go create and bring to the world? And if you choose the right thing and pursue it the right way, good things happen. You create a company, you hire people, you create a product, customers are happy with it. And so in a way, those things are pretty related. And so I guess I wasn't sure exactly how this would be as a career, but I was motivated by this. Feels really satisfying to go and explore these things that don't exist yet, whether it's research in the case of economics. And I did end up, leaving grad school and not going back to the consulting firm, but instead going and getting a job teaching economics. So that had that career for about 6-7 years. And at the same time, because of the place where I was teaching at Stanford University in smack in the middle of Silicon Valley. And I had an experience of starting a software company in the 90s and having that experience. And so both of those paths became the career, I guess you could say. It took me a long time to call it that, to say, yeah, I am an entrepreneur. I like this process of starting something and growing it. But it's from that desire to fill a void that exists that I see in the world. I want to fill it with something.
Was there a tipping point where where there was a particular issue where you thought I've got to create something here along the lines of exercise? Was there a single point where you thought, okay, I have got to put something into the world? And if so, can you remember that thought?
Yeah. So, well, the original, when we first really gave voice to this idea of a platform where people could meet each other around their activities, or their physical activities, that was when I was teaching at Stanford. My co-founder at Strava, as well as the previous software company, Kana Software, he was working in Palo Alto at a venture firm, and he would come to my office and we'd talk about this new thing called the internet. This is 1994, and it was new to us, and it was new to so many. Everything was changing as a result of the consumer internet. And so what we sort of started asking ourselves is, what if we were going to create a company? What would we do? And we had met on the crew team in college. We had met as athletes. And we look back on those times and it's like, well, that was kind of the best time of our lives. We were in great shape. We were hanging around with people we really enjoyed, and we were doing something we thought was really worth doing. And we missed that. So we said, could we create some of those same feelings using this new technology, the internet? Could we create we called it the virtual locker room. Could we recreate the feeling of being on a team and having that sense of camaraderie with others around physical activity? So that was the original idea for Strava, but it was not what we ended up building then, because the technology just didn't exist to do it. We didn't have mobile phones. You didn't have really accessible ways of tracking a workout with GPS. So we tabled it and started something else instead. And it was really kind of, but that sense of, that's missing in our lives. So maybe it's missing in other people's lives too. I think that's a common thing, a great place for entrepreneurs to start with, is being pretty self-referential and saying, if I'm not finding it, or if I don't think there's a good solution out there, well, maybe that other people have the same feeling, and that's a great place to start looking for an opportunity.
Was that the only dirt you had around the time, or did you have other business ideas that you thought, this could also work? Because what I'm trying to get at is, why go for that particular idea? And I appreciate that was the only one that made sense. But
great question is, I really recommend pursuing, if your motivation is to start something, start with a couple of ideas, 3, and almost treat them as like, well, which one's going to win? And put them to the test. Push them as far as you can. See where you stand in a few months on these ideas, and the better one will rise to the top. I think that's a really good approach. In general, you may be, maybe that you have one thing that you're really passionate about. That's really important. But it may not be the thing that you end up focusing on. In our case, with virtual locker room back in 1994, 95, we did pursue it. We tried to talk to some people who actually knew how to build websites to say, well, could this get built? And they said, no, we can't build that. But they turned us on to a different idea, completely different. And it ended up being the basis of the company we ended up starting. So being a little bit more open to the idea. You may not have exactly the thing, and you may benefit from looking at a couple of different ideas and seeing their pros and cons, because once you get going on something in earnest, you're going to be working on it for quite a while and with a lot of intensity. So you want to know you have the best idea that you possibly could have going into it.
Did you find having a co-founder at the time like vital to that process? As in, if we took your co-founder away, do you think you could have pivoted or even like formed the idea to have moved forward?
I think I recommend everybody who's starting is if you have someone who you can work really well with, it's really beneficial to have a co-founder for a couple of reasons. In case my co-founder for these companies, Mark Gainey, he and I work in really complementary ways. We just are wired; our brains work differently. So the sum of the parts is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So it's that's one benefit. The other benefit is just having someone who's going through the same thing and you can talk to. And when you're feeling good about something, they might be in need of some therapy and counseling, and vice versa. So you can help each other through those moments. So it's really beneficial. I think you have to be also ready for a lot of tough moments. It's a very intense thing to go through with somebody to start a company. So you do have this. You do need to have someone you really trust and believe in, and are able to work really well together because you're going to be put to the test. But it's beneficial in my experience. It's a really lonely job, and better to have someone you share it with.
Intuitively, that makes complete sense. There's where I work, it's kind of like a tech finance firm, and a lot of the developers have this rubber duck on their desk. And the reason they have that is because when they are in a problem and they don't know how to solve it, they talk to it. And the idea of vocalizing your issue allows you somehow to formulate solutions potentially better than if you just internalize and try and think yourself and introspectively. That may be the similar equivalent of having a co-founder where you can just breathe things into the world through conversation rather than just having to think yourself.
You've actually named it. I hadn't thought of it that way, but it's actually by having someone else that you're talking to every day, you're vocalizing your thoughts. I find that my thoughts sound amazing to me when I'm thinking them to myself. The minute I try to tell them to somebody else, you actually start to hear the flaws or the places where you don't really have it so solid, and that allows you to do something about it. So you're absolutely right. Another way to think about it is like a company starts with a conversation. Anything you're going to do starts with a vocalization of the idea to someone you're trying to bring onto the team, to a potential customer. But when you have that co-founder relationship, you're vocalizing the idea the whole time from the very beginning. It's very powerful.
Love that. Garmin cycling headsets. So bought 300 Garmin cycling head units for $180 each and gave them away to early users. Having a device was the only way to capture data for your rides back then. No mobile apps. And this was, may I say, 2009. So it helped us get to the first core set of users.
From my looking back on the first 100 days of Strava, I think that early period of we knew what we wanted to go build, what we wanted to go build. We'd actually built a very rudimentary prototype before we pulled the team together and really got going, and that was through the help of a really important person to the story, Davey Kitchell, who had invented Strava segments, this thing that was really unique to Strava in those days, still is. So we kind of had the sense of what the experience would look like. But the problem was you'd have to count on people having one of these devices, this GPS tracker on their body, on their bike somewhere, to be able to use our technology. So to break that barrier down so that that wouldn't be the obstacle to learning whether we had something that could be the basis of a company, we had to give those away. And eventually I think some things changed. That's no longer the requirement. You can use your mobile phone to use Strava. Strava, we develop our own mobile apps. You can use third-party apps. There's all sorts of ways to get your data in today, but back then that was the only way. So though it was a big cost, it was, we spent, I think, sort of something close to $50,000 on it. It gave us an audience, a community, an early community that was giving us feedback. So they weren't paying us money, but they were doing something even more important. They were telling us what they liked and didn't like about what we were building. Had we not done that, it would have taken a lot longer to go find the people to give us that feedback loops to be able to build the best product.
If I'm listening to this back, I definitely think one of the first things would be thinking, okay, so you have these Garmin headsets, you have the idea for Strava, you've given them away, but how do you find the users? As in, are you just approaching people? Is there already kind of network there? How do you find the appropriate people to give these away to?
Yeah, it was really, we followed the model of, well, who are our friends who ride bikes? It was for cycling only back then. Who are our friends who ride bikes? Let's start there, and let's tell them, if you have friends who ride bikes, put them in touch with us. So friends, then friends of friends, and so forth. And I think the other aspect I learned through that experience was, you don't need 10,000 people or 100,000 people in the beginning. You need about 10. 20 will go a long way to giving you feedback, to giving you a lot of usable information. And from that, you can build a better product. You can understand how people are using it, how they want to use it. And then that will allow you to get the next 100. And from there, you can get the next 1,000, so you can build up in waves. So we didn't have to go for very long giving away these devices before there was now enough people talking about Strava in the communities they were in, that people started buying these devices so they could use Strava. So we didn't have to keep that. That wasn't the driver of our growth for very long.
So if I was to look at what Strava was back then, so you have the Garmin cycling head unit, and then are they uploading their data online, or how are they then? Yeah, how are they then uploading that, and then how does it get viewed?
It seems like the dark ages, but you would take this little cycle computer off your bike, and you with a cord, you'd plug it into your computer, and Garmin had a little application on you could install on your computer that would suck the data from the device into your computer, and then you could upload it to Strava. You could upload it to our website. It was web only back in the first few years even. So kind of clunky. That was another thing, is, it wasn't easy. You'd have to be really dedicated. You'd have to have, some technical expertise, enough to be able to know how to use these, the applications that we were asking you to install on your computer. And that's another lesson, I think, is like, people are willing to work through a lot of hard stuff, a lot of mud, get through the mud to get to the good stuff, if there's something good there. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but there has to be something that's like, oh, I really want to get that magic moment, that if I get the data in, I'll get something back that's really worth it. In our case, I think that we built something that, though it was really rudimentary, it gave them a real sense of motivation. After a workout, they could get more out of the time they spent being active by looking at their data on Strava, looking at who else had ridden those same roads, interacting with those people through the community.
Community is something you mention a lot, and you reference it actually in the fifth point that you sent over, that you tackled in the first 100 days. So you say engagement is priority number one. We're obsessed over making a great experience for a few who found the way to our door, not on growing our audience or monetizing it. We figured if we only got a few to try what we were building, but they stuck around, the rest would come.
Yeah, I think this is probably a lot has been written about this. You kind of have to choose in your, what are you going to focus on? And if there are three things: growing your audience, having, getting a lot of use out of each person finding a lot of value out of it, versus, and then the third one being, are people willing to pay you? We focused on engagement, on just like, for the few who are using it, are they using it regularly? Do they come back for more? And I think it helped with a couple of things. One is just those people they gave us a lot of really helpful feedback. So the most engaged users are the ones who are going to talk to you and tell you what they like and don't like. The ones who aren't engaged, they don't care. They're not going to help you. Those engaged users were also the source of our future growth. They were the ones who told their friends about Strava, got other people to try it as well. So, and by focusing on engagement, I think we got an experience that over time has just paid off in a lot of different ways, which is, once you have uploaded somewhere between 4 and 8 activities to Strava, the chances are you're going to be on Strava for the rest of your life being active. So that early engagement led to, I think, the size of the community we have today. Close to 150 million registered users. It's it's because we focused on that engagement. And really, the first 2 years, I'd say that's all we did was think about how do we get the people who are using it to use it and have it be meaningful, a meaningful experience to them.
If I was to stretch out the word engagement into real terms, does that mean them giving feedback on the website? Does that mean also you meeting up with them and having some sort of events, running
Yeah.
cycling events? What does the engagement break down as?
Yeah, it's a great question because we did do a lot of those things. Let's start with like the basic. You have to every company, every entrepreneur has to decide how are they going to measure engagement. In our case, we measured it by have you uploaded an activity in the first week? How many have you done an upload? Have you followed someone in the first week? Those were the key early indicators of are you starting to engage. And then from that, we could look at other things like how many times a week are you using it, or how many times a month are you using, meaning engaging with the experience, the website or the app. Those are just like the numbers, the metrics. But as we looked at that, we saw that there was your likelihood of staying in the experience, meaning you don't just disappear, you don't leave, went up as soon as you had uploaded it one activity and followed one person in the first week. You were much more likely to upload more activities and follow more people. And if you didn't get over that initial hurdle, especially the uploading of an activity, with almost, not 100%, but very likely you're not gonna stick around. You're just gonna disappear. And I think that's what I think a lot of most consumer applications have something like only 20, if they're good, they have 20 to 25% of their registered users stick around. The rest go away. They just never use the product again, or don't, they drop off very quickly. So even a small change in engagement has a big effect because you're dealing with like 20%. If you can raise that 1%, that's a 5% boost of, in terms of, on an absolute terms. So it's like there's a sense that engagement is like, well, we got them to download the app and they registered. Isn't that engagement? It's like, no, if they're not using the product regularly, they're just gonna they're not going to tell their friends about it. They're not going to be there to pay for it if your model is that the consumer pays for the experience. So that engagement part tells you a lot about whether you have the potential to grow or have the potential to monetize when you turn your attention to those aspects.
It makes sense what you said. After a certain number of times uploading, they were far more likely then to continue, because I suppose you have that sunk cost fallacy, don't you, where you've done it enough to think, if I stop now, the previous stuff's been a bit of a waste of time, because then all that data goes. It's a bit like going on holiday, taking pictures, then burning the album afterwards, because you don't want to use it again. So it makes sense. You're sort of, you're invested, but then you also have that community feeling, but you also then had feedback from these users as well. I'd be interested to know 2 points. Did feedback again come through online or face-to-face or calls? How did that work?
Yeah.
And then second, you probably got loads of feedback, I imagine, maybe from a very concentrated number of people, but I imagine you didn't act on everything. What's the decision-making process to understand which feedback should we actually pivot and take seriously, and which others should we probably say, yeah, that's fair, but let's not change what we're doing because of that?
What we turned on very early was a way for our community to contact us and to be in touch with us. Initially, it was just email. We gave them an email address. It was prominently displayed on the website, support@strava.com. Now it's all sorts of different platforms we use for customer feedback. And that established, but what that did was established a direct communication between the user and us. And it was a team of 6 people. So they got to know us on a first name basis. There was a regular interaction, ability to interact regularly with us and tell us what you liked, what you didn't like, suggestions, and so forth. We did meet them in person. Most of the early users were either in the New Hampshire and Vermont area where our first office was, which was in Hanover, New Hampshire, where I was based at the time, or in the area around Palo Alto, in the San Francisco Bay Area, where Mark was based. So we we had places where people could actually come and meet us and talk to us. We had get-togethers, we had feedback sessions. One of them at my house one time with the core group of maybe 10 people who were using Strava in the early days. So there were places where you could actually meet us face to face. And then as we got bigger and maybe got more users, we started to show up at events and you could talk to us there. We weren't there to try to recruit people to join the community. We were just there to support you in the event, support you doing something. But you could actually meet us face to face. And I think that human touch, I think, was really important for people understanding we cared. We were doing this really not to make money, but to build a great product and build a strong community and help people live a better, more active life. But those are really important. How you take that information, you named a really important thing, it's like drinking from a fire hose. You get so much you could do, and then you have to decide, what are you going to do? What's the priority? It's important to remember that your customers have a lot of ideas, and you can't go do them all. Number one, you can't just do everything that they want because it's too much. But number two is they're going to tell you what they want, but that may not be actually what they need. You have to learn from what they're telling you about what their real intent is, and then say, okay, if that's what your intent is, you have to infer, how would I build a better product to match what they're actually trying to do? They may tell you one thing, but that's not the thing itself. That's just telling you what area should you be looking at. And then, a good example is something like, well, I like the motivation of Strava segments, but I'm not sure that I'm really trying to always get faster. I was like, okay, so people want to be active, but there's a limit to how much it's about performance. A lot of people are not actually turned on by this drive to try to get faster and faster on a Strava segment, which for anyone listening, it's a part of the technology that tracks your movement on a stretch of road or trail and then compares your time to other people who have gone the same way. And it's just done kind of automatically. So we had to start inferring that from that, well, what else would people want to motivate them? And a lot of that motivation that we tapped into came through the community. And so building in things like Strava Kudos, when you upload an activity, your friends who follow you and see your activity can give you a kudo, it's like a high five. And that turns out to be really motivating too for people who may not be that concerned about performance and how they're doing. So we learned a lot about like building the mix between directly performance-oriented features and these kind of external validation that people are looking for from their friends, these community-based features. And so we could prioritize how much to spend time on building each of those two types.
The approach you took there, where you're looking more thematic of, okay, they've told me something practically, but sort of on a higher level means something else, and so we should target that instead.
Yeah.
Did you actively think of that is how we should approach this feedback, or was it something that was more trial and error, where at the beginning you were taking it a bit more literally, or yeah?
I mean, I think I've learned a few things, and definitely have worked with some really, really talented people who know these things much better than I did at the time. But I think we learned a lot along the way, I like that aspect of starting something, is you actually learn a lot as a result. You are learning along the way, and you're hopefully not repeating the same mistakes twice, but you're also, those mistakes you make are teaching you how to handle new situations very differently than you would have otherwise. So yeah, I think we sort of found our way into this way of thinking. Even this idea of the difference between sort of performance-based features and community-based features is something our community members kind of gave us the language to talk about. There's a phrase out there that people use: if it's not on Strava, it didn't happen. Mm-hmm. We didn't coin that. One of our community members coined that and gave it to us, right? So you pick up the language of almost like, well, what does Strava mean to people? It's what they say when they talk about it with their friends. Or when they talk about it with you. That becomes the thing that you then focus on. Oh, if it's not on Strava, it didn't happen. Well, then the community-based features, it's the way to show that you did this activity to everyone. And so how do we make that the hero of the story? How do we make your activity come to life more with photos or video? Or how do we downplay how fast you ran and more, and show instead how much it meant to you, how by the title you put on there or the comments you add. So those were things that we got from the suggestion of it's not on Strava, it didn't happen, from a very kind person who wrote in and said, this is really meaningful to me.
I can certainly confirm in the UK that is a phrase for sure.
Okay.
I almost think I used to run club at work in the UK, and that was often said at the end, where everyone's like pressing their Garmin's at the end, or stopping the
Yeah.
Strava on the phone and saying that, so I can confirm. But and we'll probably touch on this at the end. But that's definitely a derivative or related to social media, because Instagram has something quite similar where I don't think the phrase is often used, but it's along the lines of, if it isn't on Instagram, did it happen? So there's definite core components of Strava where it sort of grew up in a wider sphere of social media, and then phones getting better so tracking can happen. So there's sort of multiple things that it was growing with that definitely complemented it. And I totally agree, though, that it's an amazing thing for someone to come up with, because it's not like you're doing that, but that's something the community have decided. So it's a great phrase, and it's true in some ways. But why cycling only? And again, around the first 100 days, why not go for running? Why not go for three things? Why did you think it was important for cycling only? You say, we built and launched a product for a small slice of Strava's overall market size. We figured it was better to go an inch wide, mile deep, than try to be everything for everyone, focused on their fitness.
Number one, we weren't cyclists ourselves. Mark and I, we rode bikes. We did some triathlons, but we were mostly runners. So it was peculiar that we chose cycling. So why? And then that we only chose one sport instead of trying to do two or three sports at first launch. And the numbers clearly point to running being a bigger market than cycling. So why cycling? Well, there were a couple of reasons. One was we looked around and who was actually focused on numbers and data quantification of their activities at that time. This is 2008, 2009, where we're exploring this idea. It was cyclists. They were starting to look at, everything from power meters on their bicycles to these GPS head units that would track the workout and show them, data around speed and mileage and so forth. And cycling is already a sport where you understand it's going to cost some money. The bicycle costs money, the shoes cost money. You don't just put on some sneakers and go out and run. So we figured if we can make it work for cycling, we've got something we can work with to see if it can work in other sports. So that's why we chose cycling to start. But it was never the intent to stay just with cycling. It was a go-to-market strategy. It was a way to get started and prove out a lot of ideas and hypotheses we had, which we did. And then we could use those learnings and that momentum we had with cycling to launch other sports. And then we got into run about 3 years later. So I think with the limited resources you have, it's better to put your eggs in one basket, and to focus in on one bet and see if you can get that bet to pay off. And therefore, we chose the bet that we thought had the highest likelihood of paying off. I think that's helpful. Had we gone to running too, but I don't think we would have built something in running that had the ability for people to say, "Wow, this is really different. This changes the game." Whereas with cycling, I think we did something that people said, "This is a totally different experience now than it had been before Strava."
I was just trying to think of read acrosses to others that are just starting a business, but I definitely think there's a lesson there of be really specific at the beginning and don't go too broad, and that interlinks with your other point of have a small, really dedicated group of users, maybe even 10, 20, and then think after that, how do I get to the next 100? But having that really small group and being really specific seems to have certainly worked with Strava, and I've had it for sure in other companies.
Yeah. And that audience you're building for, they really appreciate that you're building just for them, that they're seeing the progress in the experience so quickly because it's focused on their needs. Now the cyclists were a little bit upset when we said we were launching for runners too. It was a bit like we had we had an only child, and now all of a sudden we announced they're gonna have a sibling. They were a little upset, but they got comfortable with it too. It turns out a lot of the cyclists also ran, or they had friends who were runners, and now they could see them on Strava. But yeah, being able to focus allows you to really get that bond with the community that you're building for, because you're building things just for them.
The community point, and I suspect I could probably guess, but obviously it makes sense to us. Do you was that a plan of, okay, this is how we build it, do community, blah blah blah, or was it more of, I naturally want to engage with the community and just see where it goes, that it's more of a enjoyment, love for it that came first, and then second was that more of the business?
Yeah, it's tough to remember back what we were thinking at the time. So there's two things I would say in response. One is we had to balance out how much we spent on what we called single player mode versus community mode. Single player mode be me and my data, and me seeing my stats, me seeing my training log, versus me seeing all the other friends, people out there that I might know or want to know, and connect with on Strava, and seeing their activities, and interacting with them. And the reason is, in the beginning, when there's very few people on Strava, it's very difficult to have a successful community. It's very difficult to have features in the community area zone that really work for people, because they're not able to connect to very many people yet. So the single player mode helped keep people around long enough for there to be enough people to make the community features kind of benefit to everyone. Now, if I'm being really honest, we just kept getting that balance wrong over the years. We were late with a lot of things that were kind of, by the time we got to that point in Strava's history, it was like, come on, why can't we comment on people's activities? Why can't we have the ability to find people on Strava? It's like those things, those kind of community tools are still in nascent development in some ways. And I think that is a legacy of the fact that we spent a lot of time in the beginning on single player mode. But to get to to answer your question another way, it's that it's really difficult to understand what community really means to an experience until you have it. So is community just a group of people who use your product, but they don't interact? Is community the direct way in which those people are interacting to create the experience itself? Is community something that is, well, there's a group of people, but it's the smaller subgroups are, like, think about, just the way in which they self-organize to do what they need to do on Strava. And there's a lot of heterogeneity in how they use it. And you as the creator of the product are building the tools that either enable or shut down those things. And that will become kind of, it's like an iterative process of, how do people want to use it? Are you enabling that? If they do, then will they do it more, or will it steer this experience in a direction you don't want? Now, in Strava's case, we kept a lot of things away from the community that other apps added. Like, you couldn't direct message anyone until last year. And we did that because we wanted the focus of anything you were doing in community. We wanted it to be around the activity, not around just interacting with people one-to-one without the activity. We want it to be based around, someone has uploaded an activity. Okay, now you can comment on it, but everyone sees that comment. You can't make it a private comment. I think that went a long way to keeping Strava really a positive, healthy place on the internet. And I'm glad we have direct messaging today. It's there in a constrained and very careful way, but it's hopefully also, and this is my wish, no longer being part of Strava. I'm not part of the company anymore, so I can only hope that they're going to do it this way. My hope is that we don't lose sight of the fact that Strava has really stayed this very positive place on the internet, because the focus, even though these community features exist and now direct messaging exists, it's still largely focused around the primary reason people use Strava is to help motivate them to be more active. So that's still the focus area. And I think I can't claim that we had this grand vision from the very beginning that by building the features this way, it would be so. But thankfully, we made the decisions we did to result in this place we are in today.
I certainly think it is still a place that's extremely positive. It's kind of the same people that use LinkedIn, and it's those kind of positive comments where if you go on Instagram, you look at the comments, it's quite negative actually, but on LinkedIn and Strava, it's a lot more uplifting, community, wanting to help each other out. It's those two are, it's almost very similar sets of people. So I can definitely say it is still the case. On pricing, and this is interesting, and actually I didn't explain this earlier for the audience. Michael's very kindly sort of segmented these points into 3 different categories. So one of them is do things that don't scale, and one of them was around the cycling head units. The other was make decisions with little or no information, and that's what I'd like to bring up now. And the third was focus, and that was around the cycling only point and the community. I like the way you have segmented those, and I've got one small question for you at the end on those. But make decisions with little to no information. Set the price of Strava subscription at $59 per year. It did not change for 13 years. We had zero research to guide this decision. We looked at a few comparable costs like physical gym membership and the cost of marathon training plans you could buy in paper format, and inferred willingness to pay from that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. The theme of like in the beginning, there's so many choices you have to make. And if you've been, kind of sort of what we're trained to do as throughout schooling as well, if you have to make a decision, go gather a lot of information and that'll help you make a good decision. But sometimes you just can't do that. And I think that is it can be a stumbling block for entrepreneurs, that they're not comfortable making a decision without gathering more information. They delay as a result. And the delay means that other things can't be learned. So in other words, your lack of willingness to make a decision because you don't have information in this place means you're not gathering information somewhere else that could actually help you make a better decision in some other area. So in this case, pricing, we had to set a price for Strava subscription. We were adding the subscription in a few months after launch. And we did the best we could to not make it, we got into the right zone, if you will. And I have another point to make in a sec, but about price in general. But what I think that decision that we made, the way it served us well was that we got started and we could learn, therefore, that based on that price, how many people would be willing to subscribe? What would they say about the price? And we had confidence that if the price was set too high, we could add more things to the value of the subscription over time to make that price the right price. So we thought it would be better just aim a little bit higher than we thought was right, and make it good, over the course of the next few, quarters or years. And the thing I was going to say about price is it's okay to change price. We're so conditioned for either the price has got to be zero. Like a lot of, I don't know what happened. No one goes into the bagel shop and says, "I'd like your free bagels, please." You're building a product. It just happens to be made with software, and it's okay to say there's a price for it. Hopefully there's value that you're delivering to your customer, and the customer says, "Yes, this is a fair exchange. I pay you this, you give me that." But basically, and then once you have set price, it's okay to explore, well, maybe it's not the right price. In the real world, that happens all the time. We see prices change. Price of gasoline changes every day, but in software, for some reason, subscription software, for a long time, it was like, you can't change price. Well, it turns out you can. You should be comfortable saying, well, either hopefully you're explaining it well and justifying why you're changing it. That's an important thing, is how you communicate, but it's okay to change price.
Yeah, it's a really good. I hadn't actually thought of that before, but I suppose people would think, changing price is admitting that you've got it wrong, but actually, it's really just pivoting on the information that you get back after you put that out.
Yeah, that's right. So
how did you go on? Sorry.
No, you're gathering information all the time, and your consumers don't actually know how much all the things you're learning. They can't see all that. So maybe that's the thing that you just need to explain. Well, we've learned this, so therefore we're making this change.
In the first 100 days, people were uploading from their Garmin sets onto the website. Did you build the website yourself, or how did you even get that up?
The original team was 6 of us, and a couple of them were software engineers, Chris Donahue, Mark Shaw. And David Kitchell was sort of the mastermind behind some of the technology that we were putting into the website. So we had some technical expertise. I would say we didn't have all the bases covered for sure. We this was a very rudimentary, initially a very rudimentary set of features we had built into the website, and we evolved it over time. And I think that's an important lesson I learned, which is it's better to get something rough and ready up and going. It has to have something that's really of real kind of a magic moment to keep people, like I said, working through the mud to get to the good stuff. But don't wait for perfection. It's never going to happen. Number one, but also people don't look at it as like, oh, this isn't perfect, so I'm not going to use it. If there's something of value there, they're excited that you brought it to the market. It's more than they could do on their own. So I look at it as like you should be ready to launch when you're pretty rough, good enough. The expression I like is minimal lovable product. It's got to be lovable, but so it's not viable. Viable is the wrong mentality. I learned this from our Strava's head of design. It's like it's got to be lovable. Um, so yeah, just you and then but get it out there, get it in the hands of people, and that's how you start the feedback loop. So you learn what to build next and how to make you get that information flow that helps you make better decisions going forward.
Yeah, I like that. I like that split. Yeah, because what's the word? Viable is quite a technical phrase, isn't it? It doesn't really
Yeah,
have much. Yeah, it's quite like if it works or it doesn't work. Whereas lovable is much more, of an emotional. I want to use it because it makes me feel good. It's more of a
yeah,
human word, isn't it, rather than
right.
viable, which is some technical language.
Yeah, that's right.
2009. I was trying to do maths now. So that's 15 years ago. You started Strava. When you were building a business, and you did touch on this, you didn't think it would get to the level it did now, but I imagine you thought, okay, well, it will generate some income so I can live off it, and provide for my family, or certainly add to the pot that my family are also adding to. Did you ever think, like, what the upsides and downsides of starting a business? Did you think, okay, if I start this, I might not be able to do the things I want to do in the future with my family because I may not make enough, and there's sort of a trade-off there? Did you ever think of the cost benefits of building a business, and then what if it fails? Did that kind of those thoughts cross your mind at the beginning?
You're taking on risk, and so yeah, I think there's a sense of like opportunity cost in the beginning. What I think about it is like, but you got to commit. If you don't commit, you're not going to get anywhere. Ask yourself, can I take this risk for the next 3-4 years and have confidence that if it doesn't work out, you can get back on track. You can find a way back to whatever else you could be doing. If you're always in that mode of like, well, is this the right thing? Am I foregoing some other opportunity that might be more sure, even if it has less upside opportunity, less potential for satisfaction or gain, monetary gain? Uh, if you're always looking to that maybe you should be doing something else, you can't really get very far with your business. There's an expression: those who say they can and those who say they can't are both right. Um, if you're always saying this might not work, well, you're probably going to be right. It might not work. So you got to commit, and that's the best way to do it. I think also have some confidence that you're getting a lot of signal along the way. You listen to those signals, be in tune to them. Um, we were getting signals that though we didn't have it perfect, we definitely hadn't built everything everybody wanted. We had enough confidence that people were talking about this product in ways that we hadn't heard people talking about the software they used before. And that gave us a lot of confidence to keep going and keep going even through some dark times and hard moments. And I'm really glad we did.
And finally, and I was trying to think, what's a good thing to ask at the end. How, and again, it was 14, 15 years ago, so it's a while ago, but how did it feel, sort of day, if you can remember, day in, day out in 2009 when you were starting Strava? Was it really up and down, or was it just really exciting and you were full of energy? What was like the emotional angle to it within the first 100 days?
I think it was every day you'd wake up and you'd see what people had uploaded to the site, and you'd say, wow, people are out there doing stuff. They're moving through space around wherever they're living. And it was, only a few places, sure. But you'd say, wow, there's stuff coming in into the Strava world from how people are actually living and what they're doing. And in that way, you got this immediate connection to that. This is actually a part of their day. I think that's where we got a lot of confidence that people are spending time with this. That they didn't have to do this. There's no one. You can still go for a bike ride without Strava, but the fact that they're doing it and doing it again and enjoying that experience told us that we were onto something that would be a meaningful part of their life. And so if I look back on that time, and I would say I was not very active myself at that time. I was busy building Strava, had 4 relatively young children still, and now they're grown and off living their own lives. But like back then, I had young kids. But so you look at this and say, well, this is worth the time and energy because it's meaning something to the people who are using it. So I would say that was those early first 100 days of realizing what we were onto something was both like, okay, we got a long way to go, but we see that people are already catching on, holding on to this thing and making it a part of their day. So really helpful to have that validation coming in.
Is there anything that you'd like to mention before we finish the pod, Michael, that anything that I've missed or anything you'd like to talk about?
The only thing I'd say is I love the premise of this podcast, the first 100 days. I don't think it's enough of a focus. I think we mentioned this when we were just chatting in the beginning, but I think a lot of people who set out on the journey to be an entrepreneur, it's really a tenuous time where you are wondering, am I doing the right thing? And so it's encouraging that you're focusing on this phase and hopefully getting a few more people comfortable with what they're heading into. But there's a willingness, I think, once you get comfortable that you're not going to know everything. There's a lot of ambiguity. You're not going to get a lot of signal back all the time. It's when you get into the rhythm after this phase that something really clicks, that you realize. And once you get far enough away from it, you look back, and this was the most formative time in your life. That's actually where this initial part, the first phase of starting your venture, you're going to look back on it and really appreciate it for what it taught you and what it meant, what it created inside you. So really glad that you're focusing in on this in your work.
It's really kind. Michael Horvath, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me.
Great to be part of this, Will. Thanks for having me.